Okay, guys, let's start. Again, if you're not shy, if your camera ready, please turn on your camera so I can see your faces. This is a very informal session, so please feel free to ask questions. You can type them in the chat box. If I cannot see them, I'm sure Boots will be able to keep an eye on them. But let's start, okay? My name is Chi. I am going to be your grape guide this afternoon. And if you are joining us from last week's first session, welcome back. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you for joining us. This All Things Wine School is the brainchild of Boots of Gran Hacienda, and he tapped me to be his educator partner because we both believe that education is key when it comes to drinking better, and making decisions, whether you're in the store or in the restaurant. So last week we discussed about Chardonnay, which is a white grape variety that is very popular. I mean, even if you are not into wine so much, chances are you've heard of it, you've tasted it, you've seen it in the grocery store. Today, we can't be any further from Chardonnay because we are actually talking about a red grape variety that is not very well known. And I mean, just a show of hands, or maybe you can even unmute yourselves when I tell you, name me a red grape or a red wine. What would come to mind? What would you answer if I asked you? Name me your favorite red grape variety.
Cabernet Sauvignon.
Cabernet Sauvignon. Yeah, definitely Cabernet Sauvignon. What else? With Cabernet, there's usually the partner. Another one.
Merlot.
Merlot, there you go. So it's very common that when I ask even people who have known wine, they'll just say that. Yeah, and they'll name Merlot, Cabernet. Oh, someone name. Okay, Van said Cabernet. Obviously, Van, you know your wines. But for people, it's usually Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Malbec, Syrah or Shiraz, and Pinot Noir. That's it. And there's a reason for that because actually, ang Garnacha or Grenache is always the proverbial bridesmaid but never the bride. Really, it is never, or it's very seldom that you see it vinified on its own. And so you will not see its name on the label, even if it's a new, even with new world wines, it's very seldom because it's a challenge to actually produce well-made Garnacha or Grenache 100% wines. So let's get to know Grenache or Garnacha a little bit. Another difference is that this grape variety is not French in origin. It's actually Spanish. It's a Spanish grape variety that originated from Aragon. Of course, there is research, or there are researchers who say it could also be coming from Sardinia in Italy, where it is known as Cano now. So, but a lot of the research, and even when I was studying in wine school, there is a lot of support that says that Garnacha really originated in Spain. Many reasons are given, but one of the main reasons is that almost all or all the varieties of Garnacha can be found in Spain. So tonight we are drinking the red wine, Garnacha Tinto, but there's also Garnacha Blanca, which is the white Garnacha. And there's also Garnacha Roja or Grenache Gris, which is the gray Grenache. And there's also another Grenache that they refer to as the hairy Grenache, which we will not be talking about anyway, so I'm not going to discuss that. So Garnacha is Spanish in origin. It used to be the most widely planted grape variety in Spain until it was toppled by the popularity of Tempranillo. Of course, everybody knows Tempranillo. That's the grape of Rioja. It's the more commercially viable grape to plant. And so for a long time, Garnacha has played second fiddle to Tempranillo. But I think today, I hope that at the end of our session, I would have made a strong enough case for Garnacha for you guys to actually want to try it. If only because I think the Garnacha vines are really beautiful. Okay, so I'm showing you photos right now of the Grenache vines at La Femme du Mont, which is our Côte du Rhône producer. Côte du Rhône is a wine made in the Southern Rhône, made from Grenache blended with other grape varieties. So on the vine, Grenache or Garnacha, unlike Chardonnay, that is very versatile, can grow anywhere, can be planted pretty much anywhere. Garnacha needs warmth. It needs a lot of heat to fully ripen. It struggles in places where you don't get long, hot, dry summers. It ripens late. It's also drought resistant. So during this time when the world is actually suffering from global warming and temperatures are rising, Garnacha or Grenache is going to be a very, very important grape variety. It can also tolerate a lot of wind. Okay? It doesn't need a lot of nutrients. In fact, it can thrive in poor soils. Um, and if you notice these photos, you'll see that the grapevine actually looks like a mini tree. And it is trained very close to the ground. In French, they call it engoblé. In Spanish, they call it envaso. Essentially, in the southern Rhone, there is this very violent wind that blows in from southern Rhone to the Mediterranean, which can actually uproot vines and pull it from the root. Train, Fatima, just means how they shape or how they allow the vines to grow in a certain way. So most of the time you'll see a guyo or a single guyo where they actually spread it out like this and they look like curtains, right? And some of them, they need to be very, very high up. But in places like Southern Rhone where they have to battle with Mistral, with wind, you want your vines to be as close to the ground as possible so that it can actually withstand the wind. It will not be blown away. It also, if you can see, very thick trunks. And so it can actually keep its feet or roots on the ground when the Mistral blows over. Again, it is also very tolerant of wood diseases. That's why some of the oldest vines in the world are actually Grenache or Garnacha vines. In Australia, if I'm not mistaken, they have 100-year-old Grenache or Garnacha vines because they have actually survived a lot of pestilence and a lot of diseases. Yields also play a very, very big difference in the production of good quality Grenache or Garnacha based wine. Generally speaking, if the vine is pruned and is only allowed to produce a certain number, certain hectoliters of wine per hectare, the better the quality of the wine is. Lower yields just means you're going to get richer, more textured, more ageable wines. The higher the yield, the more watered down the grapes are, the less the quality of the fruit is, then you have simpler, easier drinking wines. Again, that is how Grenache behaves in the vineyard. How does it then get treated after it's harvested and brought to the winery? By the way, guys, the men on top, well, only three of them are the Zorzal brothers. One of them is actually somebody they hired to help them with winemaking and finance. But they are the guys behind our 100% Garnacha tonight from Spain, Viña Zorzal. And the next picture underneath that is a fermentation vessel. Normally with wine, people assume that you will always use oak to ferment the wine. But with Grenache or Garnacha, it's very seldom used. And I will explain why. Okay. The grape variety itself, Grenache, is very thin-skinned, has a very thin skin. And what do you think that means when it comes to the level of tannin? Like if you have a 100% Grenache or Grenache right now, I would ask you to tilt your glass and look at the color. It's very, very pale because thin-skinned grapes actually have less tannin, less, the color is going to be a little bit more translucent as compared to, say, a Cabernet Sauvignon or a Merlot, which has a thicker skin. So Grenache, thin skin. What else? Because it has thin skin, it will produce wines with low to medium levels of tannin. The berries are also very big and juicy, and because it requires a lot of heat to ripen, when it ripens, sugar is high. What do you think is the resulting alcohol level of Grenache? Low or high? High sugar means high alcohol. So imagine your Grenache wine is a low tannin, high alcohol wine with low acidity also. Because again, Grenache or Garnacha ripens in the heat. When you have a lot of warmth, you get high sugar, you get a lot of alcohol, but acidity in the grapes actually fall. So you have a grape variety that has the potential to produce wine with very low tannin, high alcohol, and low acidity. That's why Grenache is seldom vinified on its own. It has the tendency to oxidize very quickly because it doesn't have the acid and the tannin structure to protect it from oxidation. And that's why you don't ferment it in wooden barrels, because what does oak do? It keeps the liquid in, but it allows oxygen to permeate the liquid. And what that does is that it oxidizes and ages your wine prematurely. And with Grenache, that's a no-no. You don't want to introduce oxygen to your Grenache unless it's something that you really want your wine to have. Like sometimes there is what they call oxidative aging, that is anong tawag dyan? With Vendu Naturals, it's something that is done on purpose. But accidental oxidation, winemakers want to protect their Grenache as much as possible from that, and that's why they stay away from using wooden barrels. So,
Why is it lighter bodied?
I think because you don't have tannin, which is actually one of the, you don't have very, very high tannin that actually gives your wine structure. That's why it seems as if on the palate, it's lighter. And also acidity. As acid lifts your wine, tannin backs it up with structure. But alcohol actually also gives the impression of weight. So with Grenache that's well made, it's going to be balanced. It's not going to be heavy. It's also not going to be a light and flabby wine. But in general, Grenache or Garnacha based wines are going to be lighter in body because it doesn't have the astringency that you get from your usual Bordeaux blends or even your Syrah or your Malbec. That's more muscular. I was telling Boots earlier, 100% Garnacha wines, when well made, are very elegant, very refined wines. It's not going to be a punch in the gut kind of wine. It's a kind of wine that is well dressed and mild mannered, but it has a very, very strong presence. That's what Garnacha is as a wine to me. And that's why when you have a chance to buy or to taste Garnacha that's well made, 100%, go ahead and give it a go. Because a beautifully made Garnacha or Grenache wine is going to give you elegance and finesse that you won't get from your big, bold reds. So I hope that answers that question. But, okay, sometimes it's really impossible to make Grenache as a single varietal wine. And most often than not, you'll find it blended with other grape varieties to make sure that balance is brought to the wine. And the most common triumvirate, I would call it, is Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre. So the GSM blend, if you're familiar with that, that's what the Australians call their Rhone blends. But Syrah or Shiraz brings spice to the wine. Mourvèdre or Mataro gives the wine meatiness and structure. So when blended with Grenache that is high in alcohol and low in everything else, you actually create a wine that has very, very good balance. A wine
Are those
that,
like Chateauneuf du Pape?
yes, so Châteauneuf-du-Pape is one of those examples. So the Southern Rhone is very, very popular for these blends. You have your Côte du Rhône, your Côte du Rhône Village, and Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, 13 to 18 grape varieties are allowed to be included in the blend. And Grenache is usually the backbone of the blends from Southern Rhone. It's also blended with Carignan or Carignana in Priorat. So Priorat is one of my most favorite wine regions in Spain. They make powerful powerhouses of a wine, like made from Grenache or Garnacha and Carignana. Uh, so if Grenache is blended with other grape varieties, then it can definitely age. It can age longer because it will have tannin and acid to back up, and it's not just alcohol. Um, Other winemaking influences on Grenache. Um, because Grenache is very light in color, what winemakers do is they crush the grapes. Before they ferment it, they allow the skin to macerate with the juice, just to give the juice a little bit more color. And after that, after what they call a pre-fermentation maceration with the skins, they separate it and then they start the fermentation process. What this does is that it allows the juice to extract more color and flavors from the skin of the grape. They also practice the Beaujolais method, yung carbonic maceration, where they actually allow, or at least in the case of the Rhone, I think it's more semi-carbonic maceration, where they actually allow the grapes to sit on one another. And of course, when the grapes are sitting on top of each other, there's weight and then they split, right? But fermentation begins intracellularly. So you're actually able to get more flavors from the grape and more color extraction also. Again, because of the risk of oxidation, because nga Grenache is not protected by any kind of tannin or acid structure, there is very, very seldom use of new oak. One of our examples tonight uses old oak, but only for aging, not for fermentation. Protective fermentation just means that they will make sure that the wine is protected from the influence of oxygen, because they don't want to destroy the wine before it leaves the winery. Grenache can be made in many styles, by the way, in case you're curious. It's not just still red. Grenache is the grape behind some of your favorite rosés, okay, your Provençal rosés. And I'm not sure, I don't think VDNs or that the fortified sweet wines of France are very, very popular here in the Philippines, but they're some of the most fantastic for me anyway. Fortified sweet wines, they are also made from Grenache because Grenache has high alcohol. It's actually a very good grape to make fortified wines with. So where in the world can you find Grenache? Again, in Southern Rhone. So if you know your Châteauneuf-du-Pape, if you know your Côte du Rhône, if you know your Vaquera and Gigonda and Tabel, then you know Southern Rhone. If you know the Rhone Valley, in the north, the star is Syrah, Shiraz. It's cooler continental climate. Then you go down to Southern Rhone, the valleys flatten, you get warmer Mediterranean climate, and that's why Grenache is king over there. It's also very popular in Languedoc-Roussillon. Languedoc-Roussillon in France is the home of most of its Pays d'Oc IGP table wines. But they also have very, very good value wines made from Grenache. Of course, Garnacha will not be around without Spain. No? In Spain, you will find Garnacha as the second most widely planted grape variety next to Tempranillo. And it's very, very popular in Priorat, as I said earlier, those really beautiful wines blended with Carignana. And then there is Navarra, which is in the north, towards the north of Rioja. Tonight, I am tasting one from a place called, from a winemaker called Viña Zorzal, which is 100% Garnacha from Navarra. Anywhere else in the world, apart from France and Spain, Australia. Actually, Australia has the oldest vines in the world because Australia has still been able to stay away, or at least successfully stay away from my gosh, phylloxera. Phylloxera wiped out the vineyards in Europe. But Australia managed to survive. It never even got phylloxera. And so some of the oldest Garnacha or Grenache vines are found in Australia, in the Barossa Valley where it's hot, and McLaren Vale. So it was brought there by James Busby. In case you're wondering, who brought wine to Australia? James Busby is considered the father of Australian wine. Just a piece of trivia for you guys. So now what I want to do really, because I think with these wines, it's important to be able to compare. So if you have a Côte d'Aron, which is the one from France, that you, if I were you, I'll pour it in one glass and then get your 100% Garnacha, whether it's Clos de Luz or whether it's Viña Zorzal, and compare them, okay? Believe it or not, even if you don't know which is which, tilt your glass. The paler one is going to be your 100% Grenache. The darker one is going to be your GSM or your Côte d'Aron blend, because Syrah and Mourvèdre actually lend color to Grenache, to the blend. So I would just like to review. I think we did this the last time we were together. But really, when you're looking at wine in the glass, you just want to check for clarity. I was asking Boots, one of these wines, they said it was unfiltered. And I know Gijan has an experience with unfiltered wine. Like she said, why is there sediment floating in the bottle? I said, check first. If the producer says their wines are unfiltered, chances are you'll find sediments floating in there. But so far, when I looked at my glasses, both of them, they're both clear. One is lighter than the other, okay? Aromas, I'll get back to that later. But really what you want to sniff is, are you getting fruit? Is it fresh? Is it dried? Is it jammy? Or are you getting floral? Are you getting herbs? What are you getting? And when you finally taste your wine, you're assessing for sugar level of acidity, tannin. Remember, Grenache has relatively low to medium acidity, low to medium tannin, but boy, high alcohol. So let's see later if that is really what you're going to get in your glass. Just to give you a basic this is what Grenache or Garnacha ought to look like, smell like, and taste like. Okay, this is a textbook Grenache tasting note. But let's see if it actually holds true with the wines that we are comparing today. Grenache is going to be pale in color, pale to medium. On the nose, you will get more red fruit character. So you get more strawberries, red currants, cherries. And I remember the first time I sniffed Grenache, I said, something is tickling my nose. Parang there's something maanghang or spicy with it. Grenache has that characteristic. It's not black pepper. It's not that. But there's a certain sweet spice that you would get on your nose. And also depending on where it's from, and this is more typical of Grenache-based wines that are grown in France, because they are grown alongside thyme and lavender. So you will get a little bit of garrigue. That's what they call, it's like a grouping for all of these herbs that you will find in the Southern Rhone. And both of our wines today are relatively young, but as they age, from being fresh red fruits, you will get more oxidative notes. You get caramel, hazelnuts, almost raisiny, pruny, plummy notes. Okay, so high-tech, the other photo gumagalaw. So we have two producers today that I want to focus on. Stéphane Vedeau, La Femme du Monde, he actually started, this is a relatively young producer. He founded it in the year 2000, if I'm not mistaken. And he makes Côte d'Aron, which is his entry-level wine, which is this. Then the Côte d'Aron Village. When you see Village in French wine labels, it just means it's better quality than the one without the Village name. So it's usually on a better site, slightly steeper hills, facing the sun, better soil. So La Ferme du Monde has Côte d'Aron Village, Baccarat, Gigondas, and Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So 5 wines that are Grenache blended with Syrah and Mourvedre. And then the other producer is Viña Zorzal Malayeto. Viña Zorzal was started by Anton Sanz in 1989. I believe his sons took over in 2013, and they originally wanted to rescue indigenous or local grape varieties native to Navarra. So as I said earlier, in the mid to late 19th century, a lot of the old Garnacha vines were pulled out and replaced with Tempranillo because that was just much more appealing. It had more acid, more tannin. And during that time, they thought that that was the way to go. Fortunately, one of the good things that global warming is bringing to us is that older grape varieties like Garnacha are now being rediscovered, replanted. Abandoned vineyards are actually being rescued and replanted so that they can start going back to the way that their forefathers made wine. And that is exactly what the Zorzal brothers, the Viña Zorzal brothers wanted to do. They originally just wanted to start off with a nice rosé, because Garnacha is actually one of your grape varieties for rosé. But then they found an old abandoned vineyard by the Ebro River, by the mountains, which they felt was a good site for their Garnacha vines. And so they are now making beautiful 100% Garnacha based wines. Bottles, I just noticed, well, my bottle doesn't have that embossing here. Usually that's a very Chateauneuf de Pape characteristic of the bottle. You see that embossed character. So these two are very different wines, even if they are both Grenache based, because the one on the left is not 100% Grenache. It's 60% Grenache blended with some Syrah for spice and Mourvedre for boldness, for meatiness and structure. The other one is 100% Garnacha. So average age of the vines in the Côte d'Aron, it's 50 years. The Viña Zorzal, even younger, 35 years. Different stones or soil types. In Southern Rhone, by the way, it is very common to find wide, flat pebbles kasi the stone actually absorbs heat from the sun and then reflects it back to the vineyards, allowing the grapes to still ripen even if it's evening or even if it's cooler. So they are called galettes, but I think the English named them pudding stones because they actually look like pudding. They're flat and round and white. On the other side, Viña Zorzal, they actually have very, very stony soils, very poor soils, which is actually the type of soil that Grenache likes. Grenache, si Grenache gusto niya nahihirapan siya. It likes to dig deep to get nutrients from the soil. And what you get are very, very flavorful grapes, very, very high concentration of flavors. Fermentation method for both, definitely no new oak in fermentation. In La Ferme du Monde, they use cement tanks, as I showed you earlier. They don't add sulfur, by the way. They are not yet certified organic or biodynamic, guys, but they are actually adhering to that type of farming method and winemaking method. When I say no sulfur added, sulfur is usually added to wine to stabilize it, to make sure that it doesn't spoil. I think especially important when you're importing wine, no? Exporting wine, importing wine. But with them, they have decided to not add any sulfur to their wine, trying to be as low intervention, minimal intervention winemakers as possible. Viña Zorzal, fermented in inert vessels, so stainless steel tanks, cement tanks, and no use of artificial yeasts. So both producers are trying their very, very best to really stick to the fruit, to allow the fruit to express itself in the wine. I was just telling Boots, I think now everybody's going back to basics, even with farming. People are trying their very best to be as kind to the earth as possible, therefore producing fruit that does not need a lot of intervention to be made into good wine, which I think is fantastic because now everybody's asking, where's my food coming from? Now people are also curious, where is my wine coming from? So the less artificial stuff is in there, the better. And I think both producers are trying to do as much as they can on that side of the business to make sure that whatever it is that you're enjoying is actually going to be good for you. And of course, just don't drink like 2 bottles at a time. Nothing is ever going to be good for you if you drink in excess. Um, Climate wise, guys, and believe me, you can actually taste this and smell it. The Southern Rhone Côte du Rhone blend is more moderate in climate. I mean, yes, the Rhone Valley, sometimes you say it's continental, cool continental, but as you go down the valley, Southern Rhone, it's more, you get the influence of Provence, so there are longer, hotter summers. And there's also that wind that actually moderates it. So when you taste it and you smell it, you actually smell ripe fruit. You smell the sun. The other wine, on the other hand, was grown in a cooler continental climate. It's actually by the banks of the river on a mountain or a steep or a slope. So you actually get two very, very different kinds of wines, even if they're made from essentially the same grape variety. Uh, Now, okay, the good part. So, I know you guys, some of you guys have the wines in your hands. If you tilt your glasses, I can tell. I don't even remember which one is which anymore. But the Côte du Rhône definitely has a deeper color. It's still ruby. When I say ruby, it's red, but there's a tinge of purple a little bit. And I'm guessing this is also the influence of Syrah. But the other one, which is 100% Garnacha, is paler. And you know what, guys? This is the test. Put your finger under the bowl and look down. You can actually see the outline of your fingers under the glass that has the 100% Grenache. The one that's a blend, you don't see the full outline of your fingers. So just by looking at it, you know that there is a very, very big difference just in terms of tannin, and you haven't even tasted it because you can already see one is really, really thin. On the nose, I want us to sniff our Côte de Rhône. If you have it, I wrote this note 2 days ago when I tasted the wine, and I still get the same. So it's more ripe red berries. I get a lot of strawberries actually. And it's fresh. It's not, because sometimes it is not uncommon for people to describe Côte de Rhône as it smells like strawberry jam. But this doesn't, to me, it doesn't smell like strawberry jam. It smells like fresh berries. Is anyone getting any other note on the nose that is not written there from the Côte de Rhône? Anybody getting anything spicy? Actually, I wrote sweet spice because when I first smelled it, I said, I smell cinnamon a little bit. Or something, a spice that you use when you bake. There are people who bake in this group, I know. So that's what I get on the nose with this wine. Just a lot of red berries, fresh, ripe red berries. A little bit of herbs, but not distinct. Like the red fruits, you can really tell. The others, you just know that it's not a red berry. So very simple on the nose. That's all you get. A lot of ripe red fruits. Now I want you guys to, I'm so used to drink wines that are Grenache blended. I'm curious to try this mono-varietal bottle. Yeah, it's very, very good. It's very different actually. That's from Rosanna. So guys, I want you now, very different, to swirl and sniff your 100% Garnacha. I shouldn't have written pala my note. Kasi you'll just say, yeah, I also smell that. So what do you smell? Let me take out my tasting note. What do you smell? Feel free to unmute yourselves or type it in the chat box. Because I find it very different from the other one. Just really different.
The first time I smelled the first wine, I really got perfume. That's the first thing that popped up in my mind. And the next one, the Zorzal, I really thought of leather, which you had that in your notes earlier. So
yeah, actually, G, it's so funny because if you read, and this is what I'm saying now, if you copy your tasting notes of the internet, you'll get something completely different versus you really smelling it.
yeah.
I get so much leather, black fruit. It's like it's almost like a fruit roll up, but not really. It's more black fruit than red fruit, which for me, I'm thinking why? Because Grenache itself, the Garnacha, the grape variety, you really get a lot of red fruits. But this one, I get a lot of black fruit. I'm thinking maybe it's the climate, or maybe the fact that the grapes are not as ripe, maybe because it's cooler. I don't know, but this one, I can really smell that it's not red fruit dominant. It's more black fruit, it's more leathery. I get some cherries, but it's not the maraschino cherry kind of cherry, but a darker cherry. Anybody notice that also? If you have this wine, it's not, it's the same age as the 2018, as the other wine, but it's very different in terms of aromas. Someone sent something. Typically, would there be a difference in aging potential between a Grenache blend vis-a-vis a 100% Grenache? Yes. First of all, I think for me, but I don't know if you believe, I don't think you can really age Grenache. I think it's one of those grape varieties that are best drunk young. Just because when tannin is already low to begin with, and acid is already low to begin with, as the wine ages, it will lose more of the tannin and the acidity, and you will be left with only alcohol. But, I mean, I have not yet tasted an old Grenache. I have tasted aged blends like Chateauneuf de Pape, definitely. Gigon d'Avacra, because it has the structure to back it up. But I don't know, maybe the Viña Zarzal guys might just be able to make us ageable Garnacha 100%, right? But for me, I think that ageability wise, first of all, Côte d'Iron, you don't really age it. You drink it young. It's a very, very popular table wine, bistro wine, gastropub wine. But 100% Grenache, I think, is not as easy, or it's not going to be as ageable as Grenache that has been blended with other grape varieties. Just speaking from my experience, that I've tried older wines that are blended, and I have not yet tried a Grenache that's over a certain number of years. I don't even know what's the oldest Grenache I've tried, because all of the Grenache wines I've tried are usually blends. Priorat blends, definitely. Priorat are age worthy because they are blended with Carignan. So Carignan, when added with Grenache, it's just fantastic. It's like, for me, it is the answer to Bordeaux, but I think with just a little bit more character. Tama ko. I love Bordeaux also, but I love Priorat. For me is just one of those wine regions that I would love to visit because I love their wines. So definitely Priorat can age. 100% Grenache or Garnacha, I probably wouldn't age it.
There's Chi, just like to add, no? But tama si Dondi. Generally, the blends tend to age longer than the monovarietal, no? Actually, there's only two that I can say and tasted that can really go on the longer mile, no? Pag monovarietal. One, but they're very, very, they cost about $1,000, no? So, Chateau Rayas is one. In Spain, CDP, and the other one in Priorat is Ermita from Alvaro Palacios. That's 100% also. That can age also, but again, they're kind of excluded in that general rule. So in this case of Malayeto, I see it more short term, mga 8 to 10 years lang max, no? Among others. But I that's a very good question by Don D.
Yeah, yeah, really. What makes those wines, Boots? What makes those single varietal wines ageable? Why are they able to age?
Well, both of them are very old vines. So plus the per vine ratio is very concentrated. So like Raya's centenarian yung vines. Also for Ermita, among others, plus its goblet as well. But they're really an exception to that general rule, I think.
Yeah, and actually nagulat nga ako because actually one of the reasons also why that's expensive is a lot of the vines, the old Garnacha vines didn't really survive, diba? A lot of them either died or got pulled out and replanted with Tempranillo. So there is a reason for wines that single varietal Garnacha wines that can age. Number one, yeah, the fruit is very, very good fruit. Lots with high concentration of flavors, I guess is what I'm saying. Because with wine, for it to age, it has to have high of everything. It has to have a lot of all the good things that wine should have. So that as it ages, even as it loses some of its tannins, some of its acidity, it has the structure that can actually last and make the wine go that extra mile. But really, without tannin, without the protection of tannin or acid, it's very, very difficult to age 100% Grenache, I think. Van, what causes some Grenache to taste like red berries and others like blackberries? Again, as I said earlier, it has a lot to do with the two wines today, for example. One is blended. So I think the fruitiness also comes from Syrah and Mourvèdre versus the other one, the Garnacha, which is 100%. Also planted in a place where climate is cooler. Usually, I would think that you get riper fruit when it's warmer and less ripe fruit when it's cooler. So it still has the 100% Garnacha from Viña Zorzal still has some of the red berry characteristics. But I just found that it had more of the, in fact, it even smelled a little bit like black currant, something quite darker fruit, darker berries in that wine because it is 100%. It could be that. I don't really know. But sometimes it's really like that. It's I was expecting it to be red fruit when I first sniffed it, like pure red fruit, but it isn't. Anybody else? Okay, you're welcome. So, hindi pala natin natitaste. We just stopped at sniffing it. Okay, so let's try it. I'm going to do which would you start? I would start with probably the Coteron because I think it's just less, it's more fruity in style, more refreshing, easier to drink. So I'll start off with that. Dry. I don't, it's not low tannin definitely because I feel tannin, but it's not the kind of tannin that coats your teeth that makes you want to scrub your teeth, or it's not the kind of tannin that makes you feel like you patted your tongue with paper towel. It's there, but it's well integrated into the wine. It doesn't stick out. Acidity, I'd say medium because it's a good food wine. And one of the reasons that makes it a good food wine is it has, a decent amount of acidity. Body is also medium. I find this wine to be a medium wine all throughout. Medium intensity of flavors, meaning the flavors actually echo what I smelled. It's a very honest wine. It's a what you see is what you get, or what you smell is what you get kind of wine. And finish is medium. It's It is their entry level wine, but you know, this was actually given 90 points. 90 points by was it Robert Parker that gave it 90 points? Yeah. And actually he said if Chambol Musigny was made in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, it would be made by this winemaker. Yung Chambol Musigny is a big, it's like a one of two producers in the Côte de Nuit that just makes excellent burgundies from Pinot Noir. And this wine is their entry level wine. Okay, for an entry level wine, I was just telling Boots earlier, maybe because I was drinking it to study it, I found that it had a little bit more complexity than what I would expect from a regular Côte de Rhône. Côte de Rhône in France, if you go to any bistro, that's what they'll serve you as table wine. In fact, if you can eat anything with this and it will be fine, just because it's a very, very versatile wine. It also has some spice. Actually, I'm tasting a little bit of the spice. Again, very straightforward Côte de Rhône. This is a GSM blend that's meant to be drunk young, served chilled. And you can imagine yourself in a bistro in Paris sipping this by the bucket while enjoying your steak frites. Anybody drinking this with me? It's good, no? Easy to drink wine. But guys, alcohol content of this is 14.5. Okay, so I mean, with Grenache, it is not unusual to have wine that has 18% ABV. So this is considered low, low alcohol in terms of just Grenache, but it's still pretty high because when you think about it, the wines we drink are normally at 12.5 to 13% ABV. So 14.5, you will feel it a little bit, especially if you're drinking on an empty stomach and you're not really used to drinking. But just very simple, fresh, easy to drink Côte de Rhône. Next is, and this wine, I'm very, very excited to try with you if you haven't yet tried it. Okay. Dry wine. I didn't feel the tannin here as much as I did with the Côte de Rhône. The tannin is there, but it also, the wine felt on the palate a little softer, not as astringent. You know, with tannins, you really feel it on your cheeks, on your teeth, and on your tongue. It coats your tongue. This one, the tannin levels are low, but acidity is there. I wouldn't say it's low acidity. There is acidity, so I'd say medium. It's actually a very quiet wine. I know that's a weird word to use for wine, but it's one of those wines that sneaks in, sneaks upon you, sneaks on you, sneaks in on you. It's very refined and it's not in your face. It's not going to make any big announcements. But intensity of flavors, it actually stays on your palate longer. Well, on my palate, it stayed longer than the Côte de Rhône. Definitely, I can feel the effort in making 100% Garnacha wine from very, very good fruit. That is, whenever their wines are described, they're going to tell you that the wines are made from very honest winemaking, and it just expresses where it's from. A bridesmaid one. It's a beaut. Rebecca Feliciana says, lovely. I hope you're pertaining to the wine. Now, it is a nice wine. It's not an in-your-face wine. In fact, with Grenache, I had a wine teacher who said, Grenache proves to you that you don't have to be the most beautiful, the most powerful, always the first in everything to be appreciated. Because Grenache is actually the kind of wine that is just there. It is the backbone for a lot of long-lived greatest wines of the world, like Priorat, for example. But on its own, it can actually make for some interesting, beautiful, refined, elegant red wines. Um, I would drink this on its own, guys. I have to say, when I tried the Côte de Rhône, I drank it and I drank it with food. And then this, the Malayato, it was actually an afterthought lang that I ate something after I drank a glass na yata. And what I had with it was baked potatoes with aioli. And it was such a fantastic combination. I was not expecting it because normally when you think Grenache, high alcohol, or usually when you think red wines, you wouldn't think to eat starch, diba? But so, which brings me to this question. So, Chi, both wines are, one is, you said it's everyday drinking, you can drink it with anything, and then you have one that is a little quiet, a little bit more elegant. What do you eat with Grenache or Garnacha, and really, what don't you eat with Grenache? Because if you look at menus everywhere, you will always see a Côte de Rhône wine in the wine list, because it's so versatile that you can practically eat it with anything. You can eat it with meat, you can eat it with fish with sauce, you can eat it with cured meats, you can also eat it with cheese. There is really nothing that you cannot enjoy with a nice glass of Côte de Rhône or Grenache. Except that I don't think it can tolerate too much salt, because normally you want something salty to bring down the tannin levels of your wine. That's what salt does to tannin. It makes it less astringent, it brings out the fruitiness. But with Garnacha or Grenache, where it's actually already very low in tannin, if you introduce food that's too salty, for example, mature aged cheese with crystals, I don't think will go very well with Grenache, just because the salt will overpower the tannin, which is already very, very low to begin with. So I think food with sauces, like for example, you can actually make your Côte de Rhône as a part of your dish in a beef stew or a lamb stew. A game, they say, and I've never tried this actually. They say that game is also very, very good with Grenache or Garnacha. Anything that has a little bit of ango. Okay, so wild boar. I have to try maybe calderetang kambing would go well with a Côte de Rhône or a Grenache. But anything that's gamey, cured, I think would go very well. As far as cheeses are concerned, Manchego too salty? No, Dondi, I think Manchego, if it's semi-corado, if it's not aged Manchego, I think it would be fine. Foie gras, why not? I think it would be a good combination. I actually have some foie gras in my fridge. Now I want to make some. Yeah, I think that would also work. What about lechon? Yes. You know what? Lechon with anything is okay. Yeah, I think gusto ko tuloy ng foie gras. But in terms of, sorry, I have to go back to the cheeses. Usually I would stay away from the aged cheeses with salt crystals. Yun lang. But I would do an Asiago. I would do like a semi-ripe cheese, like a medium cheese, not the really, really soft, creamy ones, but somewhere in the middle. Even cheddar cheese, I think, would go well with this. But just nothing aged or too salty. Any other suggestions for food? Kasi for me, Côte de Rhône, really, there is nothing you cannot eat it with, because just it's such a versatile wine that you can actually sit down in any restaurant and you'll be able to find it on the wine list. That's just how easy it is to pair with anything and everything. So I think if today, what I really, really want you guys to just take away from our Grenache and Garnacha comparison is that, first, try new grape varieties as often as possible. If you come across something that you've never heard before, you've never tried before, now is the time to be trying them. A lot of people like Boots, for example, sell wines online, and they are actually more than willing to answer questions about any questions you might ask. Gone are the days that we used to be very intimidated by people, by wine merchants, by sommeliers. Give Grenache or Garnacha a chance because it's never really a person's first preference whenever they go and look for red wine, right? But now you realize, even in this heat, because even with its high alcohol, with the way that the grape is, with very low tannin and medium acidity, it is a red wine that you can drink even in the hot summer months. It's red wine you can chill and enjoy even while you're in 35-degree weather, like here in Manila. So, and it doesn't matter whether you prefer 100% Garnacha or a blend, as long as you try something new. I think I would have done my job, really. These All Things Wine School sessions are really meant to open your eyes to something new in terms of wine, in terms of wine and food pairing. And yeah, that's it from my end. But do you have anything to share? You guys have questions? Please feel free to ask them now. The floor is yours. Feel free to unmute. Everybody's so quiet naman in this group. You're welcome, Dondi. Thank you.
So next week we'll be discussing Pinoy favorite, no, Chi, I guess.
Yeah.
Pinoy favorite, no. So we'll be discussing Bordeaux blend sound, something more common, no. If Garnacha and Grenache naman is something bridesmaid type, Bordeaux naman is the one. How would you classify Bordeaux blend? How would you?
Depends if it's left bank or right bank. No, but guys, Bordeaux is one of the most well-loved wines in the world. And even in France, they produce like more than half of what that country produces, which is saying a lot. So please don't miss next week. It's going to be fun. One of the wines we're featuring next week, the winemaker is actually a Filipina, and I met her and she cracks me up. She's just really funny. So I hope that you don't miss out on that. And if you enjoyed the class today and you're posting stuff on social media, please do not forget to tag Gran Hacienda and 5.5 Twists. We're really, really just happy to share what we know with you guys. And we're also happy to learn from you guys because this is a two-way street. So thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to see you next week. Will we cover any Philippine wines? Is that even a thing? I've never tried Philippine wine that I actually like. I don't know. The jury is out on that one. Malayato, yeah, enjoying Malayato. Yeah, it's a beautiful wine, I swear. But no, we are not covering any Filipino wines just yet. Unless you guys plan to buy a vineyard somewhere, Fatima, and start cultivating grapes. But no, we haven't. We're not. It's not yet in the pipeline. Yeah. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. And wow, I'm on time. I didn't talk too much this time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Class dismiss.
Class dismissed. Don't forget to tag us. Bye-bye.